Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. and in this case, Michael K Vaughan did not waste his youth on the particular comics that we're talking about today, and neither did I. If you could work that one out, fine. Because this is the Mighty Thor. Marvel Comics, The Mighty Thor. Stan Lee at Marvel Comics had the inspired idea that one of his superhero characters would be the Norse god of thunder. And originally he intended it as a low-rent, I think he intended it as a low-rent knockoff of Captain Marvel. A gimmick where an ordinary person does something and transforms into a supernatural being and then transforms back into an ordinary person. But it grew from there. At first, the opening issues of Thor and Journey into Mystery they're dumb. They're just dumb. There's no hint of the potential of what's there. None in the slightest. But gradually, Stan Lee, and especially his artist Jack Kirby, realized the mythological potential here. They realized that this could be the grandest character of them all. Thor, of course, is my favorite Marvel superhero. And the wags throughout my life have said the reason that Thor is my favorite Marvel superhero is because he's a big, strong guy in a red cape. That he, in other words, is the closest that Marvel gets to Superman. I don't think there's any truth to that. I've just loved this character, except for the beginning. And a couple of disastrous intervals in between. I have loved the way various writers do this character. Gradually, Stan Lee introduced a sprawling mythology. No pun intended. A sprawling mythology of what Thor's life is like. His Thor is not just whatever Captain Marvel is. Instead, he is the Norse god of thunder. He's thousands of years old. He comes from a mythical realm of Asgard, firmly ensconced in the Norse mythology of the 9 worlds. He has a mystical hammer, almost unlimited physical strength. His father Odin is the king of the gods. All of the other gods, Loki the god of mischief, Balder the brave, they're all part of Norse mythology, and they end up being part of Thor as well. In a backup feature to the Mighty Thor called Tales of Asgard, Stan Lee introduced also a trio of Asgardian warriors. Volstagg, who is fat, Hogun, who is grim, and Fandral, who is dashing. He's like Errol Flynn. He's great with his blade, lightning fast like that. And they took off with fans. Fans love the Warriors 3. They made an appearance in the Thor movies. The fans love them. So they also became a staple of Thor's Asgardian adventures. And this was, I would say it's a problem, but it was a challenge for Stan Lee and all successive writers, which is, okay, if that's what you're going to say is true, that this is the actual Norse god of thunder, that he can control the weather, that he's thousands of years old, that he can lift mountains, well, how are you going to have him fight the Stilt Man? How are you going to have him stop a robbery? How are you going to have him have any human adventures, in other words? How are you going to do that? I argue, and we will end with this point at the end of this interminable video, that reality is terrific for comic books. It's terrific for fantasy comic books. It really is. But it renders utterly ridiculous Thor's membership on a team like the Avengers. Why would he team up to fight anything side by side with the Wasp? Why would he do that? Why would he at various points in Thor's membership on the Avengers, all the rest of his teammates are grown men in leotards who have no more superpowers than you do. But that was the challenge, and it led to an oscillation in Thor comic books. You're going to have periods where he's got human adventures of some kind or other, and then you're going to have periods where he has vast adventures elsewhere, in other realms, in Asgard or wherever. Those were always my favorite. I think they allowed Stan Lee and then subsequent writers to shine. And oh boy, we're talking about the mid-70s today. A run of Thor on the mid-70s, and an annual, a king-size annual of Thor. And they were all captured in an epic collection. So this is a rare example where Epic Comic Book Wednesday is actually talking about an epic collection. Look at that. War of the Gods. The writing here is by Len Wein. The artwork is by John Buscema. This was the last truly great run that he had on Thor. And that is not that is not John Buscema on the cover there, obviously, as you can see. That is a great 1970s Jack Kirby cover. Just incredible, and not the only great Jack Kirby cover that's immortalized in this collection. Jack Kirby was, of course, the staple artist at Marvel for a long, long time, and then he left Marvel and went elsewhere. And then he came back to Marvel. And he was given 2 Marvel comic books, unfortunately. He was given Captain America and the Black Panther. And his run on both those books those runs are among the dumbest runs that those characters have had. Those issues can only be enjoyed ironically. And by this time, Kirby had evolved his artwork style to big and blockish. Not unappealing at all. He's great no matter what he does. But in addition to writing and drawing Black Panther and Captain America, he also got to draw covers for Thor and the Fantastic Four and a bunch of other things. How wonderful it was for me to buy these things on the newsstand and have Jack Kirby covers for Thor. That was great. And this is all of our cast. There is the Lady Sif, Thor's immortal Asgardian girlfriend. There is Volstagg and Fandral and Hogan the Grim. These are drawn by Jack Kirby. This cover, the 1970s was a time when John Romita Sr. was hovering over everything that everybody did at Marvel, doing in little nips and tucks here and there. There's a tiny, almost imperceptible amount of John Romita Sr. on this cover. There's Thor. There's Balder the Brave and Carnilla, the Queen of the Norns, a mighty powerful sorceress. Just a terrific cover. For once, the Epic Collection editors picked the right cover to put on the front of this thing. And this is massive epic Thor adventures. Just massive. Leading off with it starts off and it looks like you're in the middle of a story. There is Thor and his mortal girlfriend, Jane Foster, and Odin, the king of the gods, coming out of a gigantic pyramid. So you're in the middle of a story, it feels like. That's because the storyline before this one, Odin, the king of the gods, goes missing. And Thor has to go looking for him. And he finds him a brainwashed member of the Egyptian pantheon, Osiris and Isis and whatnot. He finds they have drafted him to be their king of the gods and mind wiped him. So he has massive amounts of power, but he doesn't remember who he is. And there are pretty good adventures as a part of that. Thor goes and rescues his father, eventually gets his memory back. But it turns out that the reason that the Egyptians were able to kidnap Odin and wipe his memory is because Odin had already given himself amnesia. He cast a spell on himself to leave his kingdom and become an anonymous guy on Earth. Not to teach himself humility, as he once did to his son Thor, because he doesn't remember it. So it's not going to teach him anything. There is no explanation for why Odin would do that, other than the explanation that becomes really unavoidable in this period in the 70s, which is that he's just insane. Like Odin is just insane. So he's already mind-wiped. In the issues before this epic collection starts, we see some of his adventures as a bib-overalled older guy on Earth, meeting a young woman named Judith and starting to become very fond of her. He has a long white beard and bib overalls, and he rides around in a pickup truck in little town America. Picture Jesse Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard, only able to lift 90 tons. That is Odin. He swats cars like flies. He is, as you're going to see, roughly 10 feet tall. No one seems to notice or care anything about it. Them to think, well, we've got all sorts of town problems, but should we concentrate on this guy? He came out of nowhere. He's super strong. He's 10 feet tall. Maybe we should pay attention to him. Maybe get the local news to pay attention to him. Yep. No. So, anyway, Thor and Jane Foster. Jane Foster at this point is alive because in an earlier storyline, she is fatally wounded or ill. She's going to die. She's on death's doorstep. And Thor's immortal girlfriend, Sif, from Asgard, conducts a ritual with the rune staff of Chemotharn and sacrifices her own spirit to bring Jane Foster back to life. So Sif is gone at the beginning of the story, and Jane Foster is around. And if you think, well, Jane Foster's in the movies, she's played by Natalie Portman, that's cool. No. Fans deluged Marvel Comics with letters right away saying, no. If you're going to get rid of one, get rid of Jane Foster, but we actually want both. Reverse course. Change this decision. We do not like this decision. You must bring back Sif. In fact, the editors of Thor were so cognizant of the fan reaction that they devoted a whole letter column in Thor. Once upon a time, comic books had letter columns. And they devoted a whole letter column to a long 1,000-word letter from one irate fan laying out the case for why Sif should come back. And all of that, if you're reading comics in the 21st century and you don't remember them from before 2015, 2014, you're going to think, oh, so they gave Jane Foster her own comic book and have renewed it endless times despite no sales. If fans said they don't want Jane Foster, then Jane Foster has been rammed down their throats for years now. That's what you're telling me now. No, I'm not actually telling you that. That's the way that mainstream comic books are now. But that has cratered their industry and made sure that all of them are working for $10 an hour. Once upon a time, if fans wrote in and said, we really don't like this, the editors changed it as fast as they could. Imagine. But it isn't changed back yet in this first issue here. Thor is drawn with a kind of magisterial dignity by Buscema. He gets rid of the pyramid, he gets it to go away, and he has a conversation with his father, Odin. And Odin says, well, I guess you've brought me back to my senses, you've saved me from those Egyptian gods and the forces of the god of death. We will now go back to Asgard. And Thor says, well, certainly, Jane and I would be happy to. And Odin is right back to his old hobby horses. He doesn't like Thor slutting around with a mortal woman. So he says, what? Look at that. He's immediately outraged. And of course, I didn't read this issue when it came out in 1971. My grandfather hadn't been born in 1971. I could not possibly have gotten this from a spinner rack at Tro's dry goods store. Not the chance in the world. With beagles, they're the only dogs in the whole town that were allowed inside the store. But my great-grandfather read that scene and thought, oh, come on. You're not going to cut him a break when he just saved your life. And then, to make it worse, one panel after Odin says, I don't even want to know you if you hang out with this mortal girl, he goes and talks to the mortal girl that he was in love with. See, there he is, 10 feet tall, over her. He gives her a flower and vanishes. So he apparently knows that it's okay to slum with mortals, but no. So Thor and Jane Foster, they make the most of it. They fly back to her apartment. And the Warriors 3 are in her apartment, just making themselves at home. And they start to hang out and just have fun. When a giant hand bursts through the wall. It's a giant robot. A giant mining robot that has been refitted. The Servitor. And he tells Thor, you will serve my master or I will pop Jane Foster like a grape. And Thor, in the first note that we get of this writer's version of Thor, Len Wein's version of Thor is violent and a little coarse. You get the sense that this guy has been fighting for thousands of years and that maybe Jane Foster's not the first Jane Foster. Sif, sure. Sif he's known for thousands of years, but a mortal woman? How many of those has Thor had? The servitor tells him, you will serve my master or I will kill the woman that I have in my hand. And Thor says, screw you, and immediately starts fighting. How does he know that the servitor isn't just going to simply kill her? He doesn't know. He doesn't appear to care. It's a giant Donnybrook of a fight. Just fantastic fight. Buscema is really good at that. And eventually, Thor gets the upper hand and topples the servitor and swats away his power staff and climbs up on top of him and raises his hammer. I want to read you something that shows you what I'm talking about. This is Len Wein's version of Thor. Thou hast attacked without cause. Thou hast threatened the life of the woman I love. Thou hast attempted to slay the comrades I held most dear. For those and many other offenses most foul. Actually, Thor, those are the only 3 offenses that he's done. He hasn't done anything else. He's only been here 5 minutes. The enchanted hammer Mjolnir shall now strike without qualm, without mercy. And the servitor says, quarter, Thunder God, I hereby surrender. And Thor says no. He says no. He is basically going to kill the servitor. He says, nay, servitor, 'twill not help thee. Now thou shalt feel the righteous wrath of... But then he's interrupted by Zarko, the Tomorrow Man, a lame-ass villain from earlier Thor comics here, who has come to the past. He's from the future. He's come to the past to ask for Thor's help in saving the future. Because there are these weird beings called Time Twisters, a trio of weird, atoliated humanoid features who are visiting various periods along the timeline. And when they leave a period, the energies they release destroy that world. They destroy that Earth. And so Zarko, the Tomorrow Man, is under no illusions that Thor wants to help him. He says, well, they're in my century now. If you don't stop them there, they'll be in this century next. So Thor and his comrades agree to go and help. And the action then breaks to Asgard, where Odin is back home. We saw him disappear in a bolt of energy. He is now back home, but he doesn't seem like himself. He seems meaner and meaner, as he tells to his advisor. He says something that I've repeated to book section editors for the whole of my life. I know exactly what I am doing. I've even used that facial expression. But we cut away. Len Wein is very good at this. He's very good at balancing subplots. Not all Marvel writers are, to put it mildly. Not all Marvel writers are. And after a few misadventures in the time stream, Thor and his friends get to Zarko's century and see the Time Twisters. Look at that. Look at how creepy they look. Zarko orders his populace to attack these beings, and the beings blast them with energy beams that waste them away, their chronal energy. So they either devolve people to babies or evolve them to old corpses and dust. And this shows Thor and his comrades that this is a real threat. So, of course, they are going to do something. But first, the action breaks again. Back to Asgard, where Odin is offending Baldur the Brave, who for some reason in this run is wearing a t-shirt. Why would an Asgardian warrior wear a t-shirt? I don't know. Is it sun's out, guns out? I don't really know. Asgard never seems to have a sun. There are always these planets in the background. Odin seems disturbed. But again, we're just teased with that. We go back to the future, where Thor and his friends attack the Time Twisters, who aren't listening to reason. The Time Twisters actually explain who they are. They are exploring the timeline. Look at that great visual. I swear. Buscema never did better work on Thor than this run. They ignore the Asgardians, and so the Asgardians immediately fight for Odin, for Asgard, and get blasted by the chronological radiation beams that these beings have devastated a whole crowd with. And it doesn't affect them at all. And Fandral wants to know, why are we standing here? Why aren't we affected? And Thor says, what matter the ravages of time to we who are immortal? And the Time Twisters are stunned by this, but it doesn't matter. And they're still not going to stop. And in this issue, they call forth a whole bunch of warriors from the past to fight these Asgardians. And the editors tip their hand that they have heard the fans. Because Jane Foster is getting sick of just standing around watching her friends fight, so she picks up a sword. And in a flash of lightning, we get this sequence right here. She raises the sword, and for a second, in the lightning blast, it looks to Thor like she is Sif. And then nothing, and then back. That 3-panel sequence buried Marvel Comics in letters. They got millions of letters. Before any issues more in this run came out, they got buried in letters. People saying, don't just tease us. Don't just tease us. We want her back. You can keep both, but if you're going to get rid of one, get rid of Jane Foster. They don't succeed in stopping the Time Twisters. So they think that their next course will be to go back to the 20th century and fight them there. But then they have an idea, why not go all the way to the end of time, where they came from, and stop them just as they're beginning, so that we save all the timelines. And they do. They go all the way to the end of time, and they meet the one last person. And they see there the Time Twisters are in these little egg sacs. So this will work. This plan will work. Jane Foster has to convince the last man here that his progeny are going to destroy the whole timeline, that he really should kill them here to stop that from happening. And he does. Terminate life support systems. He's got a tear in his eye, but he terminates their life support systems. So way back in the 70s, Len Wein was giving his answer to the age-old conundrum of, would you kill baby Hitler? And then our friends all go back home and apparently don't remember that it ever happened because the timeline has readjusted. And they're watching TV. This big, huge thing there with knobs on the side is a TV. They're watching a TV when they see news that a South American country is being upset by Firelord, who Thor knows as a former herald of Galactus. An incredibly powerful being who under no circumstances whatsoever can be defeated by Spider-Man. less said about that, the better. Thor decides to go, and he does not take the Warriors 3, but he does take Jane Foster to this South American country in order to see what's going on, in order to see what is Firelord was kind of a friend of his. How is this happening? Turns out that Firelord is under the thrall of a hypnotic, freedom-fighting woman, and she puts Thor under her thrall. And then the next issue, that South American country has seen better days because now it's Thor and Firelord that are fighting at her behest. It's a complicated story with a whole bunch of little details in it that are quite interesting. Like, for instance, Thor he's mashing tanks with his hammer from the sky. And at one point, he throws his hammer and falls, because in this era of Thor, he can't fly without it. And it comes back to him. And one persnickety fan wrote in and said, well, technically, Thor's hammer returns to his hand after he's thrown it. But doesn't it also return to where he threw it from? Would it follow him if he was falling? It doesn't matter. The picky little things, one other little detail that I want to show you because it's very important, and almost no Thor's writers do it. We cut back to Asgard, where Odin orders Balder to be imprisoned. Balder has to fight his way out against his fellow Asgardians. He has to fight his way out of the throne room. So something's really gone wrong there. But Jane Foster decides to save the day. She has a knife fight with this guerrilla leader. She has a knife fight. And in the course of the knife fight, the gem that controls Firelord and Thor is destroyed. The woman orders her conventional forces to attack the two of them. They don't have a chance, of course. And something very interesting happens during that fight. Thor is fighting with these warriors, this tank crew, when an artillery crew gets a clean shot at him. He is not. Here, let me show you. See, ordinarily he uses his hammer to deflect gunfire. But here, the crew gets a clean shot at him with a mortar round at point-blank range, and it does not hurt him. It does not hurt him. This was a long way towards reinforcing something that some people were writing irate letters in long ago, saying, hammer schmammer, Thor should be relatively invulnerable. He shouldn't have to dive out of gunfire range like, for instance, Thor does in the original Avengers movie. He shouldn't have to do that. Well, this Thor can take a mortar round to the stomach without any trouble at all, without his hammer to save him. And then we have a great, very happily, this Epic Collection reprints the Marvel Spotlight issue where the Warriors 3 got their own adventure. That's a lot of fun. Very glad that they did that. Lazy John Buscema artwork, but then we move on. Because, of course, once Thor gets back home, well, then the writer decides, well, I've cooked this book long enough. Now it's time for Thor to confront what's going on in Asgard. What on earth is going wrong? Balder escapes and makes his way to Earth to find Thor and warn him. The only problem that I have here is that the inking duties shift. John Buscema he loses Joe Sinnott as an inker, and he gets Tony DeZuniga. A heck of a guy and a good craftsman, but not well suited for John Buscema. A little bit too scratchy, a little bit too incomplete. Nevertheless, these are terrific, terrific issues because Thor does return to Earth. Look at that splash page. How amazing. He returns to Earth, and Balder tells him what's going on in the realm eternal. And he decides to take himself and Jane and the Warriors 3 and Balder back to Asgard to find out what's going on. See what I mean? You've got these lazy little motion lines. That's all that DeZuniga will do with this panel. It's a little washed out and it's a little lazy, whereas Joe Sinnott would have done more with that. He would have finished it. But it doesn't matter. Thor and his comrades sneak their way into Asgard to find out what's going on. We get the return of Hildegard, a massive Asgardian warrior woman that we met earlier on in Thor, and that I was always fond of her. But this is another example. Thor is told that Odin's age-old advisor is locked up, and he goes to the tower to free him, and finds a storm giant there guarding him, and just summarily kills the storm giant. He doesn't think anything of it. He just kills him. That's all. This particular Thor kills people. A lot. He kills people, he kills monsters, he kills things a lot. Look at that, another Jack Kirby cover. Can you spot John Romita Sr.'s hand on this cover? It's right there. He redid this area. But otherwise, it's all Jack Kirby. How wonderful to see Jack Kirby drawing Thor that's at the height of his powers. Naturally, since Odin seems not to like Thor, this looks like a rebellion. It looks like Thor's going to have to lead a rebellion against Odin. And at one point, of course, Jane Foster wants to be involved, so at one point she asks, can she wield Sif's old sword, since she's here in Asgard and doesn't want to just be pining at a window. And when she picks it up, it burns her, and she flails around with it, bangs it against a wall, and transforms into Sif. Because the editors did pay attention. The fans said, bring Sif back. You can keep both of them, but if you're going to get rid of one, get rid of Jane Foster. So they brought Sif back. So she is now in this plotline in Asgard, where Jane Foster does not belong. Absolutely not. They go to the sorceress Karnilla to enlist her help. They're going to need all the help they can get. And there's a wonderful panel here where they try to rouse the Asgardian citizenry to fight against Odin. But it turns out Thor gets the answer that he wants as to why Odin is acting weird. And it's because Odin isn't Odin. It's because he's Mangog. Who you've seen before. I talked about him in last week, actually, in a Thor issue. He is a being with the strength of a billion beings, and who is the living embodiment of an evil race of a billion people. And he has taken over. He is masquerading with the help of an Asgardian sorcerer. He is masquerading as Odin, and he gives away the game. He shows himself that he is Mangog. So Odin never actually did make it back to Asgard. There's another great Jack Kirby cover. Look at that. Just fantastic. Odin never actually did make it back. Instead, they've been dealing with Mangog the whole time. Which is a little bit on the strange side because the character doesn't act like Mangog and seems to have superpowers that Mangog doesn't have. But he takes Thor into captivity, and Thor's comrades have to go and rouse the Asgardian citizenry. And they do it in all kinds of different ways. Volstagg sits on them. The others talk to them. Karnilla scares them. It's very well done. Asgard is rising against Odin. Now keep in mind, they don't know that this isn't Odin. They don't know that this is Mangog. They think they're actually leading a revolt against the Allfather, which is kind of amazing. But this is what I mean. At one point, Mangog transforms Balder into a dog, and then he transforms Thor's other comrades into animals. Mangog doesn't have this ability at all, and wouldn't be given this ability by a sorcerer. Why would that even happen? It was a little bit on the strange side. But it turns out you can't keep a good Mangog down. Keep in mind, Mangog should not exist, right? Odin restores that evil race to life because it's learned its lesson, and Mangog disappears. He shouldn't exist as a character, but he does. And it turns out, after a while, impersonating Odin right there in the presence chamber with the Odin sword right there. Remember, the last time we saw Mangog, he had a weird fixation with the Odin sword, wanted to pull it and end all life on Earth. But it turns out you can't keep a good Mangog down. He eventually just wants to do that again. He eventually just gets obsessed with the Odin sword again. But it's too late. His power is fading. So he disappears, and that leaves Thor with a question. Which is not why is Odin acting this way? It's where is Odin? If he didn't make it back to Asgard, then where is he? That calls for a search. He tries hell. Of course, he tries the underworld. But he doesn't find him there. So he and his friends outfit the Starjammer, which is a wooden spaceship that can actually travel in space. And they go looking for Odin. There's a bit of adventure. Look at that. That is the Starjammer. How I wish we could have the Starjammer back. Some great adventures that way. We get the Starjammer, and everybody piles on board for the crew, and they go looking for Odin. And before they find him, their finding of him and the explanation of his disappearance is not in this epic collection. Before they find him, they have a whole bunch of other adventures, and they are wonderful. Space adventures. Just space adventures. See? Bug-eyed monsters. Straight out of Michael K. Vaughan, straight out of Robert E. Howard. And it's terrific. Absolutely terrific. I loved these issues. Just loved them when I was when I was buying them at the newsstand, but that didn't happen, clearly. But nothing in this collection equals that annual that it ends with. Thor, the Mighty Thor annual number 5, which I had the 50 cents ready. I wanted this thing. I wanted to make sure that the local shop that I got it from would get it because it seems special. And I love it. I've read it so many times. I was so happy that it came out in a durable paperback where I don't have to worry about it anymore. And this is Asgard versus Olympus. Classic Jack Kirby cover. Just amazing. Where the artwork is by John Buscema, and it starts with Norse mythology. Just straight up telling of the Elder Edda. Just a straight up telling of Norse mythology. Here you get Vili and Ve and Buri and Bor and all of that before you get to Thor. Then you get the whole mythology behind Thor. And then you get a fight between him and Hercules. In this annual, we're told that this is the first time they ever fought. Which would make it the third time that that's been true, because they meet for the first time and fight in a backup story in a Thor annual decades before this came out. But they also met before that in an Avengers issue where a time-traveling villain summons a clean-shaven, club-wielding Hercules to fight the Avengers. So who knows when Thor actually met Hercules for the first time. But here they have an epic fight, and it's really, really good. It's really well done. There's a little bit of awkwardness here and there. This panel, for instance, has always bothered me. What is Hercules holding on to? Nothing. He's not holding on to anything. Thor's hammer should be crosswise here, and it isn't, and no one fixed it. No one caught it. So you still have Hercules hanging on to something there, but it's not anything. But it's still a terrific fight, but Thor and Hercules eventually decide that the way to do this is not one-on-one. It's to have their realms fight. So Thor goes to Odin, and Hercules goes to Zeus to petition the Greek gods for battle. And they agree, and we get a 2-page spread by John Buscema that is one of the best things he ever did. Just look at that. That is so incredible. Many people from Iowa many people from all over wrote into Marvel and said, could we please have that as a poster? I don't think it ever existed as a poster. I don't think anyone's ever actually scanned it to get rid of the gap loss there, the gutter loss, and made it into even a scan online. But look at that. That is incredible. The two teams fight. And of course, Thor and Hercules fight in the middle of it. And victory seems to go to one side. And the Valkyrie come, the choosers of the slain come to escort the dead to Valhalla. But there's a twist at the end. And then a twist to the twist at the end. And it's just wonderful. All the more wonderful to reread. So this, not only is it a great batch of issues in The Mighty Thor, but it's also a great epic collection, a great choice by Michael K. Vaughan. I know that a lot of you bloodthirsty little marmosets want us to disagree. We don't disagree this time. I haven't watched his video yet, but I'm sure that he loves these issues. He has actually embarked on 2020 Thor, a project to read every Thor comic book, which is great, although it means he's going to hit some of those dull spots, some of those bad spots. He's going to have to work his way through them. They're all immortalized in epic collections. The only thing that isn't in an epic collection is what most fans regard as the greatest era of Thor. But this is a rare example where we are not disagreeing at all. In fact, this is a resounding agreement. But as I've mentioned, when we agree on something, since Mike's doing the picking, I always worry. I worry that he's going to exact revenge. He almost had it this week. Then things changed. Maybe next week. I don't know. I'll be right here and we'll suffer along together. In the meantime, I'll wrap this up for now. Sorry for the length. Thor is my favorite Marvel character. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.